Welcome back. Now, I've said before that I don't want to spend a lot of time in this course working on SketchUp modeling techniques, least of all the mesh and sandbox tools on which there's already a lot of information about online already. However, now that we have our survey information imported and scaled in our model, I think it's only fair that we convert it into an accurate site model. So here we are in our top view. We've still got X-ray turned on, which I like because it fades the satellite imagery into the background without it disappearing altogether. And the first thing I want to do is just to lock the tag or layer that contains the survey itself so that I don't accidentally move it or delete it. So if we go over here to the tags dialog, select the 00 CAD tag that we created earlier. And if you look in the entity info dialog, you'll see that there's a little padlock here. If we click that, it will lock that layer. So everything which is on that layer or tag will now be locked. So if you see, if I select my CAD drawing, it is highlighted red, meaning that I can't move it or do anything to it. You'll also notice that I'm working on with the CAD file that I imported rather than the PDF. This is just because I find it much easier. The CAD file has points that I can snap to so that I can make sure that my drawings are as accurate as they can be. If you don't have this and you have a PDF, that's fine. The next thing to do is to trace over the boundary lines and the contour lines. If I simply type L for lines or select the pencil tool over here, I can trace the boundary of my site very quickly by snapping to the points as required. Okay, let's delete this surface that's been created. We don't need that. And if we just hide the CAD layer for a moment, we just have our boundary lines. If we select each of those, we can right click, make group, and let's call that boundary lines. And we'll create a new tag. Let's call it site boundary and assign those lines to that tag. It's really important you just get into the habit of, well, as soon as you create something, give it a name, put it on a tag or a layer, and then keep moving. Okay, if we turn our CAD drawing back on again, the next thing is to draw the contour lines. Now for this, you could just use the CAD lines that are already there, but I always find them to be a bit messy and fragmented, and I prefer to draw my own. To draw them, you could use the line tool, snapping to those lines as required, or even the freehand tool. The benefit of the freehand tool is that it gives you a much smoother line. The negative side of that is that you have to be pretty good at tracing with a mouse to get it accurate. I'll let you go ahead and do that yourself. I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back. Now, if I just quickly turn off my CAD layer, you'll see that I've traced more of my contour lines. So I want to model more than just my selected site. I want some context, the adjacent sites, etc. So what I'm going to do now is to extend these contour lines beyond the extents of the site so I can create a more realistic site model. The other thing is I know that each of these contour lines was drawn at a 250mm separation, which is great, and that's a great level of accuracy for my site, but I don't really need that level of accuracy for the context. So what I'm going to do is just extend every fourth line so that the contour lines for the wider context will be at every meter. Now this might sound complicated, and I'll show you in a minute, it'll make a lot more sense. But the important thing to note is that we're going to get SketchUp to make a mesh or a terrain using these contour lines in a moment, and whether they are spaced at 250mm or a meter or more, SketchUp has the ability to fill in the gaps. Join me in a few minutes where we'll have all the contour lines ready to go and we'll start building our mesh. See you in a moment. Okay, welcome back again, and here you can see I've extended those contour lines every fourth line to be at 1 meter intervals, and I've spread it wider onto the adjacent sites and down towards the foreshore for this particular site. It's also worth pointing out that I used those contour lines that we generated in the previous lessons based on the Google terrain as a guide, so that these extensions weren't completely arbitrary. The other thing is to make sure that all of the lines are continuous with no gaps in them. The easiest way to find out if they are continuous is if you select part of the line and triple click, 1, 2, 3. If everything is connected, the whole line should highlight like that. If you've got a gap in it, then only part of it will highlight. You'll have to go in with the line tool and just fill in any gaps. Once I'm happy with all those lines, I'm going to select them all, right click, make group, and let's just call that contour lines, and we'll leave that untagged for the moment. Now we need to set the contour lines to the correct vertical heights. Again, this is probably a good time to check the original drawing for clarification, especially if you're working with a PDF. Here I can see again that each of my contour lines is at a 250mm interval, and that the highest point on the site is at the very back up here, this line here, 16.5, and that the lowest point is at the front there, 12. So there's roughly a 4.5 meter fall across the site. Now if we open this group by double clicking it, I know that each of these major contour lines represents a 1 meter interval, and that these ones represent a 250mm interval. Using the move tool, I can raise each contour up vertically according to their real height. So for example, we look at this more obliquely so that you can see what's going on. If I triple click this line to select it, as I have done, M to move, and then if I tap the up arrow to lock the blue axes, if I type in 1 meter, enter, that line is now 1 meter above the previous one. If I do the next one, triple click, M for move, up to lock the blue axes, 2 meters, enter. You get the idea. So I'm going to carry on and do the rest of these contour lines. If you're working along, you do the same, and I'll see you back here in a minute. Okay, fast forward again, and here we are now. If I can show you each of my contour lines is set at the correct increment. Obviously these ones are closer together, and that represents the terrain around my site. Now would be a good time to save your file. You should always be saving as you go along anyway, but I always make a point of saving just before I use the sandbox tools. SketchUp is pretty stable these days, but if it ever is going to crash, this is normally the time when it does it. The next step is to access the sandbox tools. I've got them already up here on my toolbar. If you haven't, go to View, Tool Palettes, Sandbox. Alternatively, you can access the tools from the Draw menu, Draw, Sandbox, and you can select on either of these here. The one we're looking for is From Contours. Okay, if we double click our contour lines group to open it, and select all of the lines by going to Command A or Control A on a PC, and then we simply go to Draw, Sandbox, From Contours. And there you see SketchUp fills in the blanks, and we've got this undulating terrain generated from our contour lines. So now I don't need my contour lines anymore, these ones that are generated from the Google geometry. So I can select those and delete them. And then this group of contour lines that we've just created, I can assign to the tag Site Contours. Okay, one last thing to do here now. I want to put this terrain on a separate layer or tag to keep things neat and organized. So to remove this terrain from the contours line group, I'll just go Command X or Control X if you're on a PC, exit out of the group, and then edit, paste in place. And now I can add this to a new layer. If I call this terrain mesh, and let's create a new tag called site terrain and assign this mesh to that terrain. The reason for doing this is that I can therefore turn off the contour lines and still have the mesh, and vice versa. I can leave the contour lines on and turn off the mesh. It just means I got more options when I come to produce drawings in layout later on. For now, I'll have them both turned on. The last thing to do is to delete this location terrain. We don't need that. So let's just unlock it and hit delete. In the next lesson, let's have a look at creating scenes for layout. See you there.